Okay, so Daniel in the lion's den. We've all heard the story, or at least we think we have. But what if I told you it's so much more than just a simple tale of survival? We're going to dive deep into this, really leaning on the scholarship of Dr. Wendy Widder, and see how this story is actually this incredible, dramatic showdown between the flawed, temporary power of human kings and the eternal, truly unbreakable law of God.
I mean, just stop and think about the premise here for a second. Sentenced to death for praying. It sounds absolutely wild, right? A man who is famous for his integrity gets condemned to a truly brutal death, and his only crime is practicing his faith. So how on earth does something like that happen? Well, to understand it, we've got to take a look at the political landscape and the powerful men who are pulling all the strings.
The whole story kicks off right in the middle of this massive shift in power. The all-powerful Babylonian Empire has just crumbled, and the Medes and Persians, they're the new sheriffs in town. And stepping into this new world order, we meet our main characters. You've got Daniel, an official with just unparalleled integrity, his rivals who are absolutely seething with jealousy, and the ruler at the very center of it all, a guy known as Darius the Mede, who happens to be a fascinating historical puzzle.
So, what's the puzzle? Well, Darius the Mede is a huge deal in the book of Daniel, but if you go looking for him in any other historical record from that time, poof, he's a ghost. He's just not there. So for centuries, historians and scholars have been scratching their heads trying to figure out who this guy actually was.
Now, there are a couple of main theories about this. Some folks just chalk it up to a historical error, an author writing way later who just got the details wrong. But Dr. Widder leans into a much more interesting idea, that Darius the Mede is actually another name for a king we definitely know from history, Cyrus the Persian. And this isn't just a fun fact, it's a really clever literary move. See, there were ancient prophecies that the Medes would conquer Babylon, but in reality, it was the Persians. So by calling Cyrus Darius the Mede, the story brilliantly shows how those old prophecies were fulfilled. It's pretty cool.
So with that historical backdrop, the real conflict starts to ignite. Daniel is so good at his job, distinguished by what the text calls an excellent spirit, that the king is planning to promote him over the entire kingdom. And this incredible success, well, that's exactly what paints a giant target on his back.
His rivals, just consumed by jealousy, cook up this trap that's as brilliant as it is malicious. They know Daniel is basically flawless, so they look for his one perceived vulnerability, his unwavering devotion to his God. So, they decide to weaponize it. They craft a law that forbids anyone from praying to any god or man except the king for 30 days. Then, they pressure Darius by lying, claiming all the officials are on board. The king caves and signs the decree, and just like that, it's an unbreakable law of the Medes and Persians.
And this right here sets up a fantastic clash between two totally different legal systems. On one hand, you have the law of the Medes and Persians. It's supposed to be irrevocable, but it's born from a petty conspiracy, and it's only good for 30 days. And the great irony? Its unbreakable nature ends up trapping the king himself, leaving him completely powerless. And on the other hand, you have the law of God. It's eternal, it's unchanging, and for Daniel, following it isn't a trap. It's the very source of his strength and freedom.
So the trap is set. A death sentence is literally hanging over anyone who dares to pray. How does Daniel, the one person this whole scheme was designed to catch, react? Not with fear, not with panic, but with this calm, unwavering consistency that is just truly stunning.
You have to pay attention to the details of his response, because they're incredibly important. He doesn't change a thing. He goes home and he continues his daily routine, praying 3 times a day on his knees. And crucially, he does it with his windows open, facing Jerusalem. Now, this isn't just about the direction. It's a profound act of faith. He's echoing an ancient prayer from King Solomon, a plea for God to hear and restore his people who are living in exile.
And Dr. Widder points out this brilliant little bit of wordplay going on here. The conspirators seek to find a reason to accuse Daniel. And what do they find? They find him seeking his God. The irony is just perfect. The very thing they thought was his weakness, his deep devotion, is what the story reveals to be his ultimate, life-saving strength.
And the contrast between the two men at the heart of this drama couldn't be more stark. When Daniel finds out the law is signed, he's steady, he's unfazed, he just continues his routine. But when King Darius realizes that his own law has ensnared Daniel, he is frantic, he's distressed, he works all day long trying to find some kind of loophole, totally trapped by a rule he himself made. The powerful king is in a full-blown panic, while the condemned man is completely at peace.
The sun sets on the king's frantic efforts, and they've failed. The unbreakable law has to be enforced. And so we arrive at the climax of the story. Daniel must now face the lions.
As they're casting Daniel into the den, the now powerless king can only offer this one single desperate hope. And what he says is remarkable. Even before witnessing any kind of miracle, Darius acknowledges the power of Daniel's God, the very God he himself will later call the living God.
Then, a stone is rolled over the mouth of the den. It's sealed with the king's own signet ring. The message is crystal clear. This is final. Human intervention is now officially impossible. The conspirators think this seals Daniel's fate, but the narrator kind of hints that it actually seals in Daniel's protection.
Now, what's so fascinating is that the story doesn't actually stay with Daniel in the den. We, the audience, are left in the exact same suspense as the king. We follow Darius back to the palace, where he spends this miserable, sleepless night fasting and full of anxiety. All the while, Daniel's experience is hidden from us, which just builds the drama for that morning reveal.
After a long, dark, agonizing night, dawn finally breaks. The king, who's been waiting in misery, rushes to the den. The ultimate question is finally about to be answered. Which law holds the true power? The king's or God's?
The king doesn't just walk, he goes in haste, practically running to the den. You can hear the anguish in his voice as he cries out, desperate to know if Daniel somehow survived. He calls out, "Has your God been able to deliver you?"
And then a voice from the den. It's Daniel. He's alive, he is completely unharmed, and his very first words are a declaration of vindication. He wasn't just saved, he was proven innocent. He was found blameless before God for his faithfulness, and he adds, blameless before the king since he had done him no wrong.
The king's reaction is just overwhelming relief, and it's followed by this absolutely stunning proclamation. He issues a brand new decree, one that doesn't have a 30-day limit, but points to eternity. He praises Daniel's God as the living God, whose kingdom will never be destroyed. It's the ultimate reversal. The temporary human king bows to the authority of the eternal, divine king, and the story ends with the entire empire being told whose law is truly superior.
And that leaves all of us with a question that echoes way beyond this ancient story. In our own lives, when we face laws or pressures or expectations that seem absolute and unbreakable, what happens when they collide with a conviction that is just as deep and just as unwavering? What gives way?